The Backburner and Thermal Thruster combo is a deceptively simple loadout. Upon first glance, you might write this set off as boring or maybe even a low-skilled WM1 loadout. This is the impression that I initially had when I found out what the Thermal Thruster did, and only until I actually gave it a chance did I realize that there is more than meets the eye. What I thought would be an extremely boring loadout has become my favorite combination of weapons to use on Pyro. Running the Thermal Thruster allows Pyro to have a more mobile flanky playstyle, allowing for opportunistic plays. Both the jetpack and the Powerjack complement the Backburner's main upside by allowing Pyro to move quickly, to flank enemies, or even to relentlessly chase fleeing opponents. The jetpack fills a niche that no other Pyro secondary can offer. It does a fantastic job of giving Pyro his own unique roaming playstyle. Sure, the detonator gives Pyro tons of mobility as well, but it just can't compete with the Thermal Thruster. Let me start by admitting that, yeah, this loadout does not take a great deal of mechanical skill to pull off, especially when compared to traditional Roamer Soldier or even something like Sticky Jumper Demo. This is a video about Pyro after all. This does not mean that Jetpack Pyro doesn't take any skill though. What makes WM1 actually difficult to pull off against good players is its abysmal damage per second, or DPS. Pyro often relies on his secondaries to make up for the weaknesses of his flamethrowers. Every flamethrower in the game only works at a relatively close range, and in addition to this, all of Pyro's flamethrowers have rather poor DPS when not crit boosted, with the exception of the Dragon's Fury. Secondaries like the Shotgun and the Panic Attack give the Pyro a better source of DPS, while the Detonator and Squirt Shot give a viable long-range option. The Flare Gun is both a long-range option as well as a combo burst damage weapon, and the Gas Passer is not even worth mentioning, which makes me feel kind of stupid because I just mentioned it. Anyways, with the jetpack equipped, you are sacrificing reliable DPS and better chances in a 1v1 for mobility, which allows you to choose your fights and reposition more quickly. I think that being successful with the Thermal Thruster equipped requires far more game sense and positioning knowledge than many people are willing to admit. There are many counters to a WM1 Pyro such as Engineer, Heavy, Scout, and Sniper. With that being said, I'll talk about each weapon in this set and how I managed to make it work in most of my games. The primary function of the Thermal Thruster is to provide the Pyro with enough mobility to be able to effectively burn his opponents with his primary. The Thermal Thruster can deal stomp damage similar to how the Man-Treads work. This is mostly useful for bursting down a tanky opponent, but I find that I'm rarely trying to go for the stomp, it just kind of happens. You can use your jetpack to reposition, flank, bomb into a fight, or back out of a fight. While this mechanic is similar to rocket jumping in theory, it does not function like one in practice. The Thermal Thruster takes a few seconds to do an initial short jump before actually sending you flying. For this reason, I find that when committing into a fight with the jetpack, I try to start the jump from a location where the other team cannot see me. This way, I am safe from damage while I am vulnerable during this mini jump, and I can surprise my opponents when I actually do jump. Once my jump is starting, I mash 1 on my keyboard to switch to my Backburner as quickly as I can. This way, by the time I am landing, I can immediately start flaming. Depending on the map and the goal of the jump, it can be quite effective to chain 2 jumps in a row using the first jump to get to the high ground and the second jump to effectively high bomb. Just like on Soldier, bombing very high makes it harder for hitscan players to kill you, and it will also allow you to deal a ton of damage with your stomp. Also, many players will not notice you if you bomb high because TF2 players still don't look up in 2024. You can confuse your opponents even more by jumping into a fight backwards. If you make it look like you're retreating, you can catch people off guard, and you also get a ton of bonus style points. Basically everything I just covered in this section is mechanically very simple. The difficulty here isn't the mechanical ability needed, but knowing when to actually commit to a fight. I have found that WM1 Pyro basically relies on catching the target off of guard or out of position. Because most classes you will be fighting are going to have a faster time to kill with their primary than you will need to catch them off guard, either backburning them or at least dealing a decent amount of damage before they are able to return fire. Another way you can overcome your poor DPS is to help your teammates to isolate a 2v1. You can also win fights if the opponents are positioned very poorly, such as by a cliff. When you land next to an opponent with the Thermal Thruster, they will take knockback. While this can be a downside, it usually makes it easier to land your flames because it limits their movement temporarily. The jetpack also allows Pyro to retreat in a bad situation. This is especially useful since you don't need any health to jetpack away as opposed to something like the detonator. Retreating in this manner does take some finesse because the jetpack is a bit slow as I mentioned previously. If you didn't know, the thermal thruster has a hidden stat that makes the Pyro take 50% more knockback, which makes damage surfing an even more viable option. You can use damage surfing to retreat, but it is also a formidable offensive option as well. Randomly damage surfing into an unsuspecting player and melting them with the Backburner is probably my favorite aspect of this loadout. Since enemies are usually pretty eager to shoot a WM1 Pyro that's in their face, I find that this happens very frequently and it makes for many goofy highlights. Speaking of hidden stats, the thermal thruster also has a fall damage reduction stat that is not listed on the weapon card, which will certainly come in handy when you consider the fact that you are frequently going to go flying with this weapon equipped. I'm sure there's something I'm missing, but this weapon is relatively straightforward as far as what it actually does, but it opens a ton of doors for Pyro. The Backburner is the main damage dealer for this build, and it can deal damage very fast given the right situation. If you're able to get behind enemy lines unnoticed, it is usually worth it to wait until you are sure you're going to get crits before you start shooting. Remember that the angle at which crits are given to this weapon are a lot less generous than something like a backstab, so you're going to need to be looking right at the back to actually get the crits most of the time. You can use the Powerjack movement speed buff to make this go by a little bit quicker, just be sure to avoid pulling out the jetpack on accident because of the extremely slow weapon swap animation. The Backburner is a pretty simple weapon, so there's not much else to say about the mechanics. The only other thing worth mentioning is that air blasting is still extremely effective despite the extra cost. You can still support your team with air blast as long as you have a source of ammo. Using air blast in a more offensive manner is also viable as long as you have a steady ammo source nearby, whether that be ammo drops from frags or ammo packs. Air blast is arguably Pyro's greatest strength, so be sure to abuse it. I have also found that while running Backburner, enemy soldiers are eager to shoot rockets at me, which usually does not end well for them. Also, reflecting level 3 sentry rockets is super fun. The Powerjack is my melee of choice on Pyro. While some people might argue that the back scratcher is a better fit for this loadout, I would argue that extra movement speed on command is much better. You can use the Powerjack to close distance on a retreating enemy or to catch up to an unaware enemy to get the Backburner crits. The Powerjack movement speed buff is also nice to help preserve jetpack charges since the jumps do regenerate quite slowly. Since the Powerjack's damage vulnerability only affects you when you have it pulled out, I find it quite useful to switch to the Powerjack, jump off of a ledge, and then switch to my Backburner immediately to keep the speed until I land. The idea with this loadout is relatively simple, so that's pretty much all I have to say. I would encourage you to give it a shot since it's really fun and you can do a lot of experimentation and kind of finding what playstyles work best for you. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video.
Thank you.
We're cutting back upper toxic, I'm in now. Someone's rolled.
Invincible roof heavy.
Oh my god, yes.
Silver bomb. On our roof.
Oh, above you. Soldier above you, Zabi. On roof.
The incredible roof.
The invincible roof heavy.